Alrighty. So I'll just get you to introduce yourself.
I'm Murray. I'm from HOWL AND MOAN Records in Byron Bay. I've owned this record store slash part-time live music venue for the past year and a bit. Yeah, I'm just keen to support the grassroots music.
Absolutely, mate. Well, it's been a great boon for the area. There's nothing like it around the area, which is great. Just for those at home, HOWL AND MOAN Records is the only place, realistically, independent record store where you can see a live show in the North Coast. So, just want to tell us a bit about your musical tastes and what you started out listening to.
Yeah, I guess I grew up in western suburbs of Sydney, so back in the early 80s it was almost just AC/DC was what we were listening to. Either, when we were at school, you either were a fan of like Michael Jackson or Madonna or that shit, or you had AC/DC, and obviously the young brothers grew up only a few k's away from where I grew up, so they were a total inspiration. So yeah, AC/DC then led to obviously the Aussie pub rock scene, and then a lot of things changed. Probably I started high school in 1990, and towards the end of 1990 or 91, first we had Rat Cat, who came out and did pretty good noisy music which we hadn't heard before, and then obviously Nirvana, and then Nirvana blew our minds away. Being in high school, that was like the biggest, and it's probably the last real revolution we've had in music, was that whole grunge thing that happened. Just inspired everyone. All these bands that were not hair rock or overly commercial or pop got a voice. So and that's sort of what developed. I guess what I like to do is really, it sort of gave the underground or that independent, do-it-yourself scene a leg up, which a lot of still continues today. Like we had the punk scene in the 70s, which sort of disappeared once the 80s hit, but that do-it-yourself, hey, make original music, don't care about how much commerciality is to it, is probably the thing that attracted me the most. So I'm always trying to,
carry the torch.
Well, carry torch, or just be out there and see those bands that are like, hey, I was at the first gig of blah blah blah. Back in the day when I was in Sydney, and it's nice to be at the forefront and be inspired. Bands who take it to another level, who experiment, whatever it is. What I try and do here is, hey, be original, do your own thing, and don't play covers, we don't do this. What we try and do is play the music you want to play, and if I get 5 people here or 100 people here, it's always going to be successful if we've got a band playing and enjoying what they're doing. And I think that's the key.
Mate, what's with the vinyl? You guys sell vinyl here?
Yes.
Big resurgence in vinyl?
There is a big resurgence in vinyl. I think right now vinyl is the second probably most popular form of listening to music after online streaming. So there's room for Spotify, that's sort of like the market leader, or any streaming service, but vinyl has overtaken CDs, more than likely overtaken MP3 downloads.
This year it was the first time that vinyl was out.
So it's definitely on an increase. Obviously Byron is quite a small town, so it's not the most busy of businesses, but there's a core group of locals who support the retail aspect of what I do. There are a lot of travellers. Since I try and have a lot of independent music and independent labels featured here, so they find stuff they probably don't find in JB or the bigger, they find it here. So I've had really good feedback from people from Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane. They're like, man, this has been sold out for months at his local record store, their local record store, and they find it here, which is really good. So I try and keep it pretty diverse. Even though I don't have like the greatest range of maybe heavy metal, hip hop, or whatever, I try and have a nice selection where each time when people come, they hopefully find something different. You know, so, and you know, I don't really do popular titles, which is probably.
You don't really need to do it.
Well, I hope not. No,
Yeah.
like as long as I survive, then I know I'm on, you know, on the right path. So, and there's obviously the second-hand range, which is pretty varied. I, you know, don't have that opportunity at the moment to source second-hand records. It's purely who comes to me and is selling their collection, which is fine. Like, I've got a lot of good stuff that's been sold to me, and a lot of it's people who just don't listen to it. A lot of it's people who passed away and left their collection to a spouse or children, and sometimes it's that struggling musician who has a bloody good collection and hasn't got the money or hasn't got the money. Yeah, and I'm just like, damn, you know, I feel bad. You do feel bad, like, especially a muso who needs to sell their record collection to survive, but at least I know it's gone to a good home.
Just take you back to the point about the explosion of the grunge scene and how important it was. Because you know, it's from the genres that were out at the time, which were popular, which was 80s synth pop into glam metal, Poisons, and
exactly.
bands like that. And it was like the antithesis of that, wasn't it? It was the absolute.
Well, I guess if you know, even like the punk scene, for example, there was a need for something that wasn't what everyone else was listening to. So the early 70s were all the Americana, you know, like that rock and roll, which was like the extended guitar solo. Everyone was just getting off on these things like, you know, things like Clapton and, you know, Neil Young, for example, stuff like that. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but punk came out of, hey, we don't want that 10-minute jam. We want a 3-minute pop song, which turned into punk. And I think grunge was very much the antithesis of what happened in the 80s. Bad hair and big hair and bad, you know, like...
All about fashion, realistic
fashion. It was like, you know, anti-Axl Rose wearing his lycra tights on stage, you know, it was like, you wouldn't see Kurt Cobain, you know, doing that. So, and that could be what today, you know, today's music, where's that new scene? Is it the hip-hop scene, you know, which has taken quite a bit, you know, it is the most popular sort of market for mainstream market, even though it doesn't really translate to sales.
No.
You know, and so it's interesting, it's like, it's commercially out there on radio and music, but is it really like, I don't know.
Live-wise, I don't think so either. There's a big resurgence of live, which is great. Because you know it's like in the early 2000s, the rise and popularity of the DJs and all the stages all get better pubs. That's right, and they're all going back now. Yeah. So it's fantastic.
Yeah. I think there's a good, like, it's an interesting situation at the moment where there seems to be a really strong scene in Melbourne, for example, for live music. Weak scene in Sydney. Brisbane is not too bad. There are key regional areas that people like me, so independent people who are passionate about music, want to do it and host it. So that's really good.
What's what's giving us in life, really? It's places like this that aren't going to charge you a fortune to hire the space. They're doing it for more, you know, moral reasons. They're doing it because you love the music and support it.
Yeah, and I think there has to be, like, I think the performing artist still needs to earn an income, so that's the next bridge. It's like, you know, how does an artist earn an income? And there are the, you know, things like Parlour and So-Far Sounds, which are house gigs, which I've hosted one of those shows and I want to host more of them. But it's like, I really think that there's a distribution of income issue with live venues. So, you know, locally, bands don't get paid a lot to play, but the venues are earning a shitload of money on alcohol sales, you know. You're like,
I think personally, it's a lot of the time it's an afterthought. Man, enough, especially with the original stuff.
yeah,
Covers are still good, right?
yeah,
Covers
yeah,
yeah. But even if you're filling a pub up, if it's original music, a lot of the venues, if they're not really run by people who are in the know as much as they should be, then it'll be an afterthought. But the band will be sort of, look, we'll give you the space, but, but that's what we do in my experience.
And I see it as a punter, you know, like, sadly I don't perform, but being, you know, touring, I've seen gigs all over Australia and overseas, you know, and I've always been interested to see what works and what doesn't work, you know, and I think there's a lack of live music oriented venues, so where you're not competing with people out on a social Friday, Saturday night, drinking and not paying attention, and you know, you really want to dedicate that space, which means you're probably not going to be open 7 nights a week, you're going to be open 7 nights a week, and you've got a limited market. So Byron is one of those where there's no dedicated live music venue. You know, the cities, some of them perform well, some of them are really good, but even Brisbane, you know, and Sydney, sometimes I've been to shows, 4 or 5 bands on the bill and there's 50 people there on a Friday night. And then you walk outside at midnight and there's 50 people waiting in line to get into a shitty DJ venue.